In a courtroom meant to deliver justice, one powerful man underestimated the wrong kid. When a young black boy was put on the witness stand and treated like a joke by a prejudiced judge, everyone thought it was just another humiliating moment. But the boy had something no one expected: an extraordinary mind and a memory built for the law. What followed turned the entire courtroom into stunned silence. This is a story of brilliance, courage, and standing up to authority with nothing but your brain and your truth. Stay with us, because the last thing the judge expected was for the boy to win the game he started. Location: Franklin County Courthouse, Georgia. Time: 2:14 p.m., Wednesday. He came to testify. But when the judge decided to mock him instead, this boy flipped the whole courtroom on its head. The polished wood walls of the Franklin County Courthouse shimmered under the midday light. The American and Georgia state flags flanked the judge's bench. Everything in the room felt formal and heavy, from the tall windows to the echo of each footstep. A quiet tension hung in the room, the kind that made people sit up straighter and breathe more carefully. 11-year-old Zayden stood near the front, dressed in a light gray cardigan and faded jeans. His sneakers were clean but clearly worn, and his fingers fidgeted with the hem of his sleeve. His eyes, however, were steady. Behind him, his mother sat just a few rows back. She clutched a tissue tightly in her hand, eyes locked on her son. The room was mostly full. Lawyers whispered to one another, journalists sat with notepads ready, and townspeople lined the benches. All eyes were fixed on the young boy standing alone. Judge Harold Lexington adjusted his glasses and leaned forward. Known for his strict rulings and outdated tone, he scanned Zayden from head to toe. Then he squinted slightly. "So you are the witness, huh?" he said. "What could a kid like you possibly know?" A ripple of murmurs moved through the courtroom. Some people shifted uncomfortably, others leaned in, waiting for the boy to speak. Zayden glanced at the microphone in front of him, then back at the judge. His voice was quiet but clear, enough to help you find the truth, Your Honor. The courtroom stilled. Even the people scribbling notes paused. The judge blinked. He sat back in his chair and tapped his pen twice against the bench. "We will see about that." Zayden took a deep breath and prepared himself for what would come next. He was not there for applause. He was there because he had seen something that mattered. And no matter what anyone thought of his age, he knew the truth was worth telling. Where are you watching from, and how would you have responded in that courtroom? Drop your thoughts below. Zayden had always been gifted, but his brilliance did not shine from fancy classrooms or advanced tutoring sessions. It showed up in the corners of a small apartment above a laundromat, where he lived with his mother. Their home was quiet but cramped. The walls were thin, and the hum of washing machines downstairs never stopped. His bed was a pull-out cot. His desk was the edge of their kitchen table. Still, every inch of that space held love and ambition. His mother worked 2 jobs. By day, she answered phones at a dentist's office, and by night, she studied for her paralegal certification. Most evenings, Zayden would sit beside her, poring over the same legal documents she read. He would underline terms, ask questions, and memorize details. He picked up the language quickly: case names, statutes, objections, timelines. It all stuck in his brain like puzzle pieces clicking into place. She called him her little brain bank, and he lived up to it. From the age of 6, Zayden could recall conversations word for word. He remembered what people wore, how they moved, and the tone of their voice. His teachers noticed it too. He could solve logic puzzles in record time, correct grammar on the board from across the room, and once recited the school policy handbook from memory when his friend was wrongly disciplined. But brilliance alone did not pay the bills. School supplies were often bought from dollar stores. His shoes had duct tape along the soles. His backpack had a broken zipper. Lunch was usually a packed sandwich, but sometimes there was nothing but a granola bar and a bottle of water. He never complained. He just worked harder. His dream was to become a civil rights lawyer, not just because he wanted to argue in court, but because he believed justice should be accessible. He saw what unfairness looked like. He watched it unfold in his own family. His father had been accused in a business fraud case that spiraled out of control. Zayden sat through part of the trial. He noticed the gaps immediately. The numbers presented in court did not line up. A key witness contradicted himself. Zayden whispered these things to his mother during breaks and later wrote them all down in a notebook. No one had listened to his father. The system moved too fast. The lawyers did not fight hard enough. The judge had been rigid, impatient, and dismissive. That judge was Harold Lexington. Zayden remembered his face, the squint, the frown, the tone he used when speaking to his father, as if he had already decided the outcome. That same judge now sat in front of him again. This time, Zayden was not just watching, he was standing. When he discovered new inconsistencies in the case during his own quiet review of the trial transcripts, he begged his mother to let him speak up. She hesitated at first, afraid of backlash. But after reviewing his notes and double-checking the details, she knew he was right. Zayden insisted on being added to the witness list. He did not want revenge. He wanted clarity. He wanted someone to hear the truth, not from a position of power, but from someone who had been watching closely. And so, when Judge Lexington looked down at him and asked what a kid like him could possibly know, Zayden stood his ground. He had lived the injustice. He had studied the evidence. He had something to say. Have you ever been underestimated for your age or background? Tell us how you proved people wrong. Judge Lexington adjusted his robe and leaned forward slightly. The courtroom quieted as he cleared his throat, voice steady but laced with a condescending tone. "Tell me, young man," he said, peering at Zayden over his glasses, "do you know the difference between truth and lie?" Zayden stood tall behind the wooden stand, his hands pressed gently on the edge. "Yes, sir," he replied without hesitation. "Would you like me to explain it using Article 18 from the Georgia Evidence Code?" A light wave of laughter rippled through the room. Some chuckled, others exchanged glances. The judge raised an eyebrow. His lips curled into what could have been mistaken for a smirk. "Let's play a little game, then," Judge Lexington said, his fingers tapping the edge of his bench. "Truth or lie? I will read a statement and you say which one it is." Zayden's eyes narrowed slightly. He tilted his head and replied, "With respect, Your Honor, is this a game or testimony?" The courtroom held its breath. A few jurors looked sideways. His mother sat frozen, her hands gripping the fabric of her dress. The judge leaned back in his chair, lips tight with amusement. "You tell me." Zayden glanced at the court reporter, then back to the judge. "I came here to give facts, sir. If you want me to label those facts as true or false, I am happy to do so. But if this is a test of my confidence rather than my knowledge, I would prefer we proceed according to court protocol." Gasps and nods moved through the gallery. Even the opposing counsel lowered his pen. Judge Lexington adjusted his glasses again, this time slower. He had expected nervousness, maybe a stutter or awkward silence. What he got was control, clarity, and knowledge that pushed back without raising a voice. "Very well," the judge said, clearing his throat. "You may proceed with your testimony." Zayden nodded politely. "Thank you, Your Honor." What would you have done in Zayden's place? Speak your truth in the comments. Judge Lexington adjusted his notes and looked back at Zayden. His tone was sharper now, more focused. The courtroom settled into an eerie stillness. "Statement 1, the judge began, voice steady. The defendant was present at the business location on April 10th at 4:15 p.m. Truth or lie?" Zayden barely blinked. "That is a lie, Your Honor. The timestamp on Exhibit D shows the keycard swipe was registered at 4:57 p.m. That is a 42-minute discrepancy." Whispers moved quickly through the courtroom. A few jurors glanced at the defense table. One attorney began flipping rapidly through a binder. The judge continued, brows slightly raised. "Statement 2. The transaction occurred under the supervision of the accused." "That is technically true," Zayden replied, voice calm, but taken out of context. "The supervision occurred a full hour after the transaction and had no bearing on the original filing. The defense presented it to imply continuous presence. This time, there was no chuckling, no sideways smirks. The room leaned in. Every pair of eyes fixed on the boy with the calm tone and razor-sharp recall. A court clerk took notes more quickly. Even the bailiff, usually stoic, crossed his arms and gave a small nod. Judge Lexington flipped a page and read again. Statement 3. The witness testimony regarding email correspondence was consistent across all questioning. Zayden raised a brow. False. The witness first stated the email was received on Monday, then later changed it to Tuesday. That conflict is noted in transcript section 12, page 4. Now the judge himself paused. His fingers slowed. His eyes narrowed. "Where did you learn all this?" he asked, voice now free of sarcasm. Zayden stood a bit taller, from listening and caring. "I listened to the trial, the details, the changes, and I cared enough to remember what others missed." There was no sound in the courtroom. Even the clicking pens had stopped. He continued, "My father was accused unfairly. People missed things. They moved fast. They overlooked gaps. I did not. I paid attention. I remembered." The attorneys at both tables sat silent. A few exchanged glances, uncertain whether to feel impressed or exposed. The judge leaned back slowly, staring at the boy not with doubt, but with something closer to understanding. Zayden had not shouted. He had not boasted. But he had turned the courtroom, line by line, answer by answer. He had shifted the weight in the room. A once dismissive crowd now watched in quiet respect. Ever had a moment where your hidden skills stunned everyone? Share that win. Zayden stood steady at the witness stand, his hands resting on the wooden edge, his eyes sharp with focus. The courtroom had shifted from casual skepticism to silent attention. What had begun as a challenge to his credibility had turned into something else entirely. Still, he knew there was one more thing he needed to say. He cleared his throat and looked directly at Judge Lexington. "Your Honor, may I request permission to refer to the financial ledger that was previously submitted into evidence?" The judge, eyebrows lifted, gave a small nod. "Proceed." Zayden reached for the exhibit binder on the side of the witness stand. He flipped the pages carefully until he stopped at the one he wanted. "I ask the court to look at page 7, line 12, he said. "You will see a recorded transaction that appears to be part of the original deal. but the date is one day after the contract was officially canceled. The judge blinked and leaned forward. A low murmur moved through the courtroom as attorneys leaned over papers and jurors whispered quietly to one another. "That proves it was forged," Zayden said. "There's no way a canceled contract could generate an entry the next day without it being added later." Gasps echoed through the room. One of the reporters dropped her pen. The opposing counsel flipped through his notes, visibly rattled. He turned to his associate, whispering urgently. Judge Lexington's face, which had carried firm control through the entire hearing, now looked unsettled. He motioned to the court clerk. "Please retrieve and verify Exhibit 14. Confirm the date listed on page 7, line 12. The clerk moved quickly, flipping through the binder, scanning the document and then nodding. "Confirmed, Your Honor. The date is listed as one day after the cancellation of the agreement." The silence in the room felt heavier than before. It was the kind of silence that filled every corner with new understanding. Judge Lexington sat back, lips pressed together, his hands folded tightly on the bench. For a long moment, he said nothing. Then finally, he spoke. "This point will be recorded. The court acknowledges a material discrepancy in the submitted financial evidence." Zayden exhaled slowly, but his face did not show relief. He remained composed. His mind still moved like a clock, ticking through each detail. His mother sat motionless, tears forming at the corners of her eyes. A few spectators nodded. The courtroom was no longer dismissive. It had become a place where the truth found breath. Even the attorneys on the defense side looked shaken. One of them placed a hand over his mouth as if absorbing the blow of a truth they could no longer avoid. Zayden had not planned to embarrass anyone. He had come with only one goal: to make sure what happened to his father did not happen again, at least not without resistance. He had read every page. He had checked every timestamp. He had studied harder than anyone knew, and in that moment, he did not feel like a child. He felt like someone who had made the truth impossible to ignore. "What is the biggest truth you have ever revealed? Let us know below." Within hours of the court session ending, clips from the courtroom began circulating across social media. Someone from the gallery had discreetly filmed a portion of Zayden's testimony, capturing the moment he pointed out the forged ledger entry and challenged Judge Lexington's authority with calm precision. The video was grainy, but Zayden's voice rang clear and firm. The internet responded instantly. Headlines popped up online. "Boy, Genius School's racist judge read one." Another simply said, "11-year-old turns courtroom upside down." Thousands of people began commenting, sharing, and reposting the video. Influential voices in law, education, and social justice retweeted it with praise. Civil rights attorneys from across the country took notice. Zayden's name started trending on major platforms. His quiet strength and sharp legal mind became symbols of courage and truth. By the end of the day, he had been invited to speak at a local youth justice rally. The event, originally planned to highlight mentorship opportunities for underprivileged youth, quickly shifted its focus. Zayden's presence became the main attraction. Flyers were updated. News stations sent reporters. The crowd doubled in size. At the rally, Zayden stood on a small wooden stage in a public park, wearing the same cardigan he had worn in court. The sun cast a soft glow over the crowd as he stepped up to the microphone. "Justice does not care about age," he began. "It only cares about truth. And anyone, anywhere, can help reveal that truth." The crowd erupted in applause. Some people raised signs that read, "Listen to the youth," and "Truth has no age limit." After the rally, Zayden's mother was approached by a local television reporter for a live interview. Standing in front of their apartment building, she looked into the camera, her eyes wet but proud. "He has always wanted justice," she said. "Even before he knew the word, he was trying to make things right. I am just glad the world is finally listening." Comments poured in online. Some were from parents saying their kids now wanted to learn about law. Others came from young people thanking Zayden for giving them hope. Messages flooded the inbox of the community center hosting the rally. Mentors and educators reached out to ask how they could support his journey. In school, Zayden walked the halls to nods, high fives, and wide smiles. Teachers who once saw him as quiet and unassuming now spoke about his bravery in class. A bulletin board was filled with clippings and screenshots of his courtroom moment. That evening, as he sat on the edge of his cot, Zayden scrolled through the messages on his mother's phone. Some made him smile. A few made him tear up. He was still the same boy, but the world had shifted around him. He had not asked for fame. He had only wanted to be heard. And now, for the first time, the world was not just hearing him. It was echoing back. Have you ever stood up and changed the narrative? Drop a graph, increasing if you have turned judgment into inspiration. Days after the courtroom moment went viral, Franklin County buzzed with conversation. News anchors continued to highlight Zayden's poise and knowledge. Legal blogs praised his memory and argument style. Schools began discussing how to encourage civic engagement among students. But the most surprising development came not from the reporters or politicians. It came from Judge Harold Lexington himself. On a quiet Thursday morning, Judge Lexington released a written public statement that quickly circulated online and in newspapers across the state. The opening line stunned many. "I let bias cloud my judgment," he wrote. "Zayden taught me more about justice than I learned in years on the bench." It was not just a few lines of polite acknowledgement. It was a full-page message of reflection. He admitted that he had underestimated Zayden based on age and background. He acknowledged the flaws in his past rulings and expressed a desire to lead with fairness moving forward. The statement ended with a formal invitation. The judge requested that Zayden return to the courthouse for a private meeting and public ceremony. The purpose was to issue a formal apology on the record. Zayden read the message twice. He looked at his mother, unsure what to feel. "If it feels real to you, then maybe it is worth hearing," she said. "You changed something. Let him say so." They agreed to attend. Inside the courthouse, that had once felt cold and unforgiving, the mood had changed. The same courtroom that once doubted him now filled with quiet respect. Journalists, lawyers, local leaders and families sat in attendance. Zayden stood beside his mother, hands steady, eyes clear. Judge Lexington entered from his chambers, robes pressed and shoulders straighter than usual. He walked to the front and turned toward the room before looking directly at Zayden. "This court owes a debt to a young man who showed more courage, intellect, and clarity than many adults who have stood in this space," the judge said. "Zayden, thank you for reminding us that wisdom is not about age or appearance. It is about truth. And you brought truth into this room when we needed it most." The room stayed silent as he continued. "I offer my full and formal apology, not just to you, but to every child who has ever walked into a courtroom and felt unheard. You deserve better. You deserved better." Zayden stepped forward. He took a moment, then spoke. "Apology accepted," he said. Let us use this moment to make courtrooms safer for kids like me. Let us teach children that their voice can matter. And let adults remember that listening is part of justice." The judge nodded, his expression soft. A standing ovation followed. It was not loud or dramatic, but sincere. People clapped with gratitude, not just for the moment, but for what it represented. That evening, clips from the ceremony spread across the internet. A new headline appeared. Judge learns from 11-year-old. Justice starts again. Zayden did not celebrate with cameras or speeches. He walked home with his mother, quiet and reflective. He had not expected an apology, but receiving it felt like a door opening for others who might one day stand where he did. Have you ever received an apology that changed everything? Share your story. Back at home, the courthouse moment behind them, Zayden sat on the front porch with his legs crossed and a book open on his lap. The late afternoon sun warmed the steps, and the air smelled faintly of cut grass and fresh laundry. In his hands, he held a well-worn copy of Thurgood Marshall's biography. The pages were dog-eared, and a sticky note poked from the top. He read quietly for a while, his lips moving as he traced the lines. Then he looked up, thoughtful. He fought back with words, too, Zayden said, glancing toward the front door, where his mother stood watching him with a soft smile. She walked over and sat beside him. The wooden step creaked gently under their weight. She looked at the book, then at her son. "So will you," she said, wrapping her arm around his shoulder. "But in your own way." They sat like that for a few minutes, listening to the world go on around them. Cars passed, birds chirped, and somewhere down the street someone was playing music out an open window. For the first time in weeks, things felt quiet inside Zayden's chest. Later that evening, after dinner and homework, a letter arrived in the mail. It was addressed to Zayden in clean, bold handwriting. The return address showed a law institute 3 cities away. He opened it slowly, unfolding the thick paper. The words printed at the top read, "Congratulations. You have been accepted to the Summer Youth Law Leadership Camp." His eyes widened. His hands trembled slightly as he read further. "We have followed your story and believe that your voice, courage, and clarity are exactly what this generation needs. You are already a force. We just want to support your next chapter." He handed the letter to his mother, who covered her mouth as she read. Her eyes shone with pride. "You did this," she whispered, "with your voice, with your truth." Zayden nodded. He looked down at the book still resting on the porch beside him. He picked it up and flipped to the final chapter, running his fingers over the text. "I am going to keep reading," he said, "and then I am going to write my own story." His mother leaned her head against his. The night came slowly, the sky deepening above them, but they stayed outside a little longer, wrapped in something warm and quiet. Zayden was still just a boy, but the world now knew what he carried inside. What book or story shaped your dream? Drop it in the comments. Zayden's courage did more than reveal inconsistencies in a single case. It did more than challenge a courtroom or force an apology from a powerful man. His voice carried into places where stories like his were rarely told. His calm strength on the witness stand sparked conversations in schools, homes, offices, and legal institutions around the country. News networks picked up the story. Community centers hosted youth-led town halls. Lawyers and judges debated how the justice system could better serve children and marginalized communities. Zayden's name became part of that larger conversation, not as a celebrity, but as a catalyst for change. But perhaps the most unexpected transformation came from Judge Harold Lexington himself. Once regarded as stern, traditional, and often dismissive, he took a step that surprised many. He partnered with a group of legal scholars to launch a mentorship initiative for young students from underrepresented backgrounds. At the foundation of the program was a youth advisory board. Zayden helped design it. He suggested that participants not only learn about legal processes, but also speak to lawmakers and community leaders. He believed education should be about listening and being heard. Judge Lexington listened. The program launched quietly but grew quickly. Within 6 months, students from different cities were writing mock court opinions, building community projects, and researching policy reforms. And at every major meeting, a chair was saved for Zayden. He attended each one with a notebook, ready to learn and contribute. One evening, during a televised segment with a major news channel, Zayden sat beside the judge who had once doubted him. The interviewer leaned in with the final question of the evening. "Zayden, do you want to be a lawyer someday?" Zayden smiled, looking thoughtful. "No," he said, "I want to be a judge, a fair one." The judge beside him smiled and gave a respectful nod. After the interview aired, letters and emails poured in. Parents told their children about Zayden's story. Teachers assigned essays on youth leadership and justice. People who had once felt invisible began to feel seen. Back at home, life remained grounded. Zayden still helped with chores. He still borrowed books from the local library and filled the pages of his journal with ideas and observations. But the boy, who once stood in the shadow of his father's case, had now stepped into the light of his own legacy. His father's name was cleared. The verdict was overturned after further review, prompted by the evidence Zayden helped expose. That victory mattered deeply. But it was the change beyond the case that truly defined what Zayden had done. He proved that courage could come from anyone, that the truth could rise even when buried under layers of power, that the justice system should not belong only to the powerful, but to the people who believed in fairness. Zayden never raised his voice. He raised the standard. If you believe in the power of knowledge, courage, and justice, share this story. The next Zayden could be watching.